after being the only jurisdiction in North America and quite possibly the entire world to still be enforcing tyrannical COVID vaccine mandates. British Columbia's NDP-appointed public health officer Dr. Bonnie Henry announced last week that the province is no longer no longer declaring that there's a COVID public health emergency, and thus all remaining orders related to that will be rescinded. That includes the COVID jab mandate that was preventing jab-free healthcare workers from saving lives. And today, 3 such healthcare workers join me to discuss why they think public health's promise that the restriction is over is not quite what it seems. Let's talk about it.
We have reached the point in this journey that we've been on where I am confident that we can now lift the requirements of a public health emergency. So effective immediately today, July 26, we will be ending the public health emergency for COVID-19 and be rescinding the few related orders that are still in place. And that includes rescinding the PHO order requiring COVID vaccination to work in our healthcare system.
Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and sure, the timing of that announcement seems all too politically convenient, as it falls just a few months before BC's October election, during a time the NDP government is facing harsh criticism for our critically understaffed healthcare system. Nevertheless, the lifting of the mandate is long overdue good news, or is it? Today, 3 healthcare workers who, like so many, were put out by the province's draconian jab mandate over the last 2.5 years, join me to discuss how they were impacted, their initial thoughts when they finally heard the mandate would be rescinded, and why a very still in effect lack of privacy, lack of job security, and lack of accountability from the NDP government means that public health's claims that the mandates have been lifted are not good enough.
I was an emerge nurse in rural BC, so I practiced in emerge settings, medical settings, home health, and up in some First Nations communities as well. So worked more than full time during the pandemic and discovered that many of the things that we were being told were not what was actually happening on the ground. So this raised some concerns. I had absolutely no knowledge of unions or their role in our representation as employees until after the terminations. And then over the last couple of years, there has been a self-organized group of nurses. I have about 800 in my group that have been diligently working to expose some conflict of interest relationship between the BC NDP government and the BC Nurses Union that enabled these mandates to go through, even though they were illegal.
Tell us real quick, what was going in your mind? What were some of the first thoughts you had when you heard the order was rescinded?
You know, after all this time, we were expecting a reaction of happiness, of relief, of finally things have transitioned into a place where it's actually working now. But instead, the response was a feeling of dread, because we saw that it wasn't, that the language around it was deliberately ambiguous, the introduction of more conditions that are going to cause many more restrictions on healthcare, and the fact that most of our members weren't even addressed in that decision in terms of compensation or any kind of restitution. So the initial response was extreme disappointment, very much an awareness that this is not a win, and in fact there is a deliberate intent to create more of a net around people to hold them hostage.
Now, Tracy London, tell us a little bit about what your experience is and how you were impacted by the mandate, and then what was going through your mind. Was it also like Corinne's, where there was a little bit of surprising disappointment?
Yes, so I was fired because I wouldn't get the COVID vaccine. I worked for 28 years for Fraser Health in the ICU at Royal Columbian Hospital. And they just, I have a congenital heart defect, and they wouldn't accept that as a a reason to not get the COVID vaccine. I wasn't comfortable getting the COVID vaccine because I actually had 2 friends who experienced myocarditis, and I knew that that would be not a good thing for me. I went to arbitration and I lost, and I never heard from anyone again. I did my union, nobody. So yeah, I was just sort of left here wondering what was going on. When I found out that the mandates were over, I started looking into it further, and I was concerned that it just sounds like they've renamed the mandates with a new brand that everyone will have to produce their otherwise they're just going to get fired again anyway. I really don't see any difference in any of it.
Yeah, definitely some red flags there. We're going to get to that as well when you guys express a little bit more of your concerns that are representative of other healthcare workers. Terry, I'm going to jump with you. You're a lead plaintiff in an upcoming or a ongoing sort of legal action being taken against the province. But tell us what your medical profession was and how you were impacted by the mandate and your initial thoughts to the rescinding of this order.
Yeah, thanks, Drea. So I was a lab technologist. I worked for 17 years for Interior Health. Most of my career was at Vernon Jubilee Hospital. That's where I was when I got terminated. I was impacted, not as much as a lot of people were. I feel that I was extremely lucky. We did have to sell our home to downsize to afford being able to live off one paycheck because I wasn't, my mental health wasn't really good enough for me to go out and find another job, right? I mean, I'm doing so much better now. But a lot of our members are, they're homeless or living in their kids' basement or had to move to another province. A lot of people are still destitute because of this, right? So to be perfectly honest, I was excited at first when I heard. I didn't expect that they would be dropping the mandates. I wasn't so much excited for myself, but I know that we have a lot of members who just really want to get back to work so that they can get their lives back, right? However, you hear the news and 15 minutes later, you're just kind of in shock and you think about all the things that Tracy and Corinne are talking about, right? Especially it's that Bill 36, right? They put that into place and they rushed it through Parliament. It's just a backdoor way of messing with the healthcare workers' lives even more and taking control. And I feel like they're just trying to have complete control over the whole healthcare system and all the healthcare workers. So I don't really know if dropping the mandate is going to do anything.
Well, as a journalist who has covered the BC healthcare professionals' plight, I would say more than any other journalist in BC. Prove me wrong in the comments, but for now I'm claiming that title. I had the same emotion as you guys. I was happy for the people that I know maybe want to stop cleaning houses and have been waiting for this moment, but it didn't seem like justice served, and it didn't seem like it was enough. I'm going to go to a comment or the comments that were made by our health minister, Adrian Dix, following the announcement that the order would be rescinded about what needs to be declared.
Healthcare workers terminated due to noncompliance with previous orders can apply for available positions and be hired. These healthcare workers will be required to provide information about their immune status to all the relevant vaccine-preventable diseases. Under the revised BC CDC immunization manual, immunization is not required to work in a healthcare setting.
Corinne, I know that this is really itching at you. The fact that healthcare workers at large still have to disclose their status. Tell us a little bit about that concern and your thoughts on that.
Again, this is like they're not communicating really clearly, and the union has not provided any kind of communication to us in terms of clarifying what this means. But from what I saw, there is going to be requirements that you have to show your immunization status. So that would include any kind of records that you might have, or if you have lab reports that show that you tested positive for something. But for many people, it's not like, you know, as an older person, you might not actually have records of your vaccination. And I know when I was hired for the health authority, they did require me to get some blood work done to monitor what my antigen levels were in terms of my immunity to some of like rubella. And in my case, it came back that it wasn't high enough. And so I had to get a vaccination, a booster for my rubella. Now, that just, from my experience, shows that for many people, in order to prove your status, you are going to have to do blood work. Whether they say it's not going to be a practical thing or not, that is the reality if there is no other way to prove what your immune status is. Now, by creating this registry where people's personal biological data is going to be put into a provincial system is a breach of your rights to privacy. It's a breach to your consent, because once it goes there, you have no idea what they're doing with that information. And so given the state of all the concerns that have come up recently with how people's physical bodies can be under attack through viruses, giving over this information to the government is something that I would caution against, if possible.
Yeah, it does come across as definitely concerning, but consistent with what we saw happen to medical privacy this whole time since a pandemic was declared. I mean, it totally went out the window. We saw with vaccine mandates, even after the chief medical health officer, Patty Daly, admitted that those passports had nothing to do with stopping transmission. What about the lack of job security? That's one thing that stuck out to me a lot when Mr. Dix said this.
In the event of an outbreak, exposure, or future pandemic, healthcare workers who are not immunized, immune may be required to follow appropriate measures, which could include masking, modified duties, or exclusion from work. Any individual who has become eligible for work is free to apply for employment. There is currently work underway between the government and the unions regarding these issues, as such as recognition of previous service or seniority entitlements.
Tracy, I'm going to throw to you because I met you by your comment on Twitter, now X, but you were basically saying when it comes to job security, that's why you're not even going to try to go back to work right now.
No, I don't know if I'll ever go back, honestly. The way that it ended, I never thought in my whole life that that's how my career would end. I worked 28 years. I gave up so much. There's no way I'm going back to start at no seniority at 50 years old all over again. I find it very disrespectful of the commitment and the time that I've put in to Fraser Health for them to tell me that I can just apply for a job that's open. What about a position that I might have had? What about benefits? Like it doesn't sit right with me, and I will not even bother to apply if they don't acknowledge and give me back all that I've lost. Because I've lost a lot. Mentally, yeah, it was a struggle. I had, even a month ago, we had David Eby talking about those terrible anti-vaxxers.
Why is BC going alone on this?
That's an important distinction between the parties. You know, at a moment when there is vaccine hesitancy in the public, people are like, they've heard a lot about vaccines. Maybe I shouldn't get vaccinated, all these kinds of things. Both John Rustad and Kevin Falcon have been advancing, frankly, what I see as anti-vax views.
How did he go from the anti-vaxxers to taking the mandates off in a month. This seems very disingenuous to me. I don't trust them.
Well, and let's not forget the politically advantageous timing of dropping the mandates, at least on the face of it, just a few months before our election when our healthcare system is crumbling. But I'm going to throw this out to whoever wants to answer it. What about the fact that in other places in Canada, for example, in Ontario, you have the hospitals imposing the mandate on the healthcare workers, even though the mandate was dropped on the province? Do you think we're going to see that happen here?
Drea, I was actually thinking about this earlier today. We do have a group that we're in touch with in Ontario, and to me, it's absolutely crazy that they're still doing it. I personally see that the hospitals will slowly remove their own mandates as they need more workers, right? But I don't really know if it'll happen in BC, but let's face it, I think they will be allowed to, because all the hospitals, all the health authorities created policies for requiring COVID vaccination. So they can just refuse to remove the policy, right? So I think that we could see it happen in BC, that the more rural hospitals who are needing to hire back these workers more will probably be the first ones to drop their policies, is what I'm imagining. I mean, I'm not an expert though, right? That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I know there's one hospital group that has just lifted the mandate in Ontario, I think last week. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in BC. It wouldn't surprise me. You guys have raised concerns over how the BC NDP put healthcare professionals under the Health Occupationals Act. A lot of people know that as its former name, Bill 36. So what next? How do people get justice? Is this now a moot issue? What has happened to you? I'll go back to you, Terry, about that, since you guys are in legal action. Tell us a little bit about that action and what this means for that case.
Yeah, Drea, thank you. We filed our class action lawsuit in October of last year. And of course, everything moves extremely slowly, but we did finally get our certification application filed, and we will have a date set for a certification hearing for November or December of this year. So we're looking forward to that. We still have a lot to do before we get to those certification hearings. We didn't see this announcement as anything that would even come close to affecting our lawsuit. It can't be moot. We weren't suing the provincial health officer to get the mandates dropped. That's not the point of our lawsuit. People can check out the claim. It's right on our website. You know, we're suing Bonnie Henry for charter violations. We're suing for misfeasance of public office. We're suing for tortious breach of contract, right? Privacy rights we're also suing her for because of the fact that they just were able to look up our medical records, so we're making sure that we're covering all of our bases in our lawsuit, because we didn't want the courts to say, hey, no, sorry, it's moot, the mandates have been dropped, right? So we are definitely moving ahead and hope that it will help make some of these healthcare workers who are feeling a little bit lost right now feel a little bit more confident that something might be done to find some relief for all of the healthcare workers.
Well, Dr. Henry herself has admitted that she has little patience or tolerance for unvaccinated healthcare workers. So personally, I think as long as she is the top doctor, it's not looking that good, but hopefully there'll be some shaking up in that matter soon. Thank you all for joining me on Rebel News. At Rebel News, we've been covering the plights of medical professionals across the country, including those who had concerns about the safety, about the COVID jabs, as well as the unethical rollout of them. If you haven't already done so, go to our special website called nomoreshots.ca and sign and share our petition there if you think these jabs should be taken off the market. And if you appreciate the reports that we've brought you since COVID-19 tyranny was a thing, consider chipping in a few bucks to make sure our reporting goes strong.